Oh, yes, I can. I started knitting when I was 5, and I remember begging and begging and begging my mom to teach me to knit. So I must have been trying to start earlier than 5, but she made me wait till I was 5. So my mom, who was also born in the cult The Children of God, she taught herself how to knit from a book when she was 17 years old in quarantine in Japan after having her second child. And I can't even imagine how hard that was. So I grew up kind of knitting and crocheting and weaving and cross stitching, not all the time, but like whenever we had some sort of bits and pieces of materials. And then I left the cult when I was 15, but it wasn't until I was 18 when I started college and I took a learning test. And this was the first learning test I think I'd ever taken. And so the teacher comes and pulls me aside and she says, okay, you have the rarest form of learning style, which is called body kinesic. And it means like you learn through movement. You actually code things in through movement. Nowadays, I think that was like my early autism ADHD diagnosis. However, at the time, I just immediately understood that. I was like, oh, okay, I know how to knit. So I went out that day to Barnes & Noble's and I bought a book stand, and then I bought a pair of knitting needles somewhere. And I still have both of those two things, by the way. And that was how I made it through my entire college degree, so like sitting there. I honestly don't think that I read very well at all. Like I feel like the words fly off the page if I don't have something in my hand. And then I've been obsessively knitting till then. I spent a decade just making blankets and scarves because I wasn't trying to have to pay attention to it because I was doing other things. And then when I was 28, a decade later, I got pregnant. And that's when I decided I was going to start making clothes. And so I started off making baby clothes. Within a year, I made something that I felt was like actually good enough for me to wear. And then now, almost another decade later, I do like my own designs and my own things. So like this thing I'm making right now is a dress that I bought in Brazil, and I'm putting like a long crochet skirt, and then I'm gonna put arms in this pink color, and I think it's gonna be really cool. And I spent, so long thinking of the scarf again, because I was like, I'm allergic to the sun. From Slovakian people, we're the translucent, where vampires come from people. And I'm literally allergic to the sun. But cardigans are so boring. Why do they look so boring? And so I spent all of this time thinking of what I could do. At the same time, I have so many scarves because I love to travel the world, and again, allergic to the sun. So I needed something to do with them. So that's when I came up with the scarf again. And that's what I do now. So see, matches my dress. So I got this lovely Portuguese scarf again, and I'll chop it in half, and then I'll chop one half down the middle, and then I'll put it together like a cardigan and put my signature puffy sleeves on it, probably. And that is one of my favorite things that I like to make now. And when I take clothes like this and cut them apart and make them into new things, I call them my deconstruction reconstructions. And I think for me, not only is like making my own wearable art very, very healing, but it's like also kind of putting into practice the idea that you can tear things apart. You can be the expert on the bad guys and still create good, beautiful things from that. Because, as a professional Cassandra who's always predicting the worst, people like to get really mad at me and really annoyed that I only focus on sort of the dark stuff. But there's a purpose for that, and I love to just create these things. And I love talking about knitting and crocheting, and I think that everyone should do it. I was so excited when Michelle Obama started knitting, because I was like, yeah! But yeah, it's just one of those things. Very much these days, I understand that this is just one of my stims. I literally walk around knitting. I just said knitterally, that's funny. It's just that my stim happens to produce pretty things, and I like it now. Because before, or if you ever saw me making a video without something in my hands, I would just be going like this the whole time anyways. But yeah, sometimes people ask me if I can teach them to knit or crochet, and I'm like, so I can definitely teach you how to knit the basics, and then come back to me in 32 years, and I'll teach you how to do what I do. No, in reality, you probably only need a year to get good at it and 5 years to become like expert level at it, depending on how long you work at it. You know, like they say, 10,000 hours makes you an expert at something. And I always tell people, you're not good at knitting until you know how to fix your mistakes. It's not just like creating something, but being able to like take it out and fix it and make it look as good as new again. Then you can really do whatever you want. Oh, and one last thing is, I don't necessarily remember like how long it took me to learn to knit, but my child is the person that I have seen pick it up the fastest. Like, I literally showed her a long tail cast on, which is considered to be one of the more difficult things in knitting, and I showed her one time and she picked it right up. So I think that I know I have like a really good almost photographic memory, and again, that motion thing. And so I think that we have a thing that runs in our family that just makes this kind of thing very natural to us. But again, I do think it's a skill that anybody can learn with enough practice, and it's so good for healing trauma, by the way, especially knitting, because knitting goes bilaterally to both sides of your brain, and it's almost like you're just like knitting together the wounds that you've suffered in your life. So y'all can learn how to knit. There's tons of YouTubers. I wouldn't know how to teach someone virtually, unfortunately, but I do a monthly stitch and biatch, and if you are interested, there is a membership in my Patreon up in the link for that, but I will also be putting Eventbrite tickets on here when I get back. And during that, I show how to do some of my signature things, like my collars, my exit cost cuffs, etc. I just keep remembering all the cool things. I did so much knitting as a soldier in uniform, especially at my desk as the senior intelligence officer for an entire battalion. By the way, men say very, very sexist things to you when they see you knitting. Also discovered that misogynists and people that hate knitting are a circle in the Venn diagram. So it's kind of a nice like filter to get nasty people away. And I knitted my now husband an entire giant Seahawks blanket while I was deployed to Afghanistan, and now that hangs in our house as a net. It is our innovation net that I go sit in and think about the next books I'm going to write.